Hello students, myself Dr. Shreyanshu Singh. I am an assistant professor at the School of Management, BBD University, Lucknow. The topic for today's lecture is correlation analysis. Correlation analysis is a statistical procedure by which we determine the degree of association or relationship between two or more variables. That is, in correlation analysis, the purpose is to measure the strength or closeness of the relationship between the variables. For example, we might find a high degree of relationship between the price of a product and consumer demand for that product. Correlation is said to be linear if the amount of change in one variable tends to bear a constant ratio to the amount of change in the other variable. Correlation is defined by so many statisticians, and one of them is M. Turtle. According to him, correlation analysis attempts to determine the degree of relationship between the variables. Now, come to types of correlation. There are many types of correlations. One of them is positive and negative correlation. Second is simple, partial, and multiple correlation. And third is linear and non-linear correlation. So first we study about the positive and negative correlation. The correlation between two variables is said to be positive or direct if an increase or a decrease in one variable corresponds to an increase or a decrease in the other variable. So we can understand it by taking an example. If X represents the amount of money spent annually on advertising by a firm and Y represents the total annual sales, then we might expect an increase or a decrease in the advertising budget to be accompanied by an increase or decrease in the annual sales. Thus, we say that the correlation between the advertising budget and the total sales is positive. That means there is a positive correlation between the annual advertising budget and total sales. If we increase the annual advertising budget, the annual sales also increases. And if we decrease the annual sales budget, advertising budget, then our sales will also be decreased. That means the change will be in same direction. The moment of change will be in the same direction. Now come to negative correlation. The correlation between two variables is said to be negative or inverse if an increase or a decrease in one variable corresponds to a decrease or an increase in the other variable. So again, we can understand it by taking an example. If X represents the price of a product and Y represents the demand for that product, then we would expect large values of X to correspond to small values of Y and small values of X to correspond to large values of Y. Hence, we can say that the correlation between the demand of a product is negative. So, that means there is a negative correlation between the demand and price of any product. If price increase, the demand will decrease. If if the price increases, the demand will be decreased. Now come to simple, partial and multiple correlation. The study of simple, partial and multiple correlation is based upon the number of variables involved. Simple correlation involves the study of only two variables. That is, in simple correlation, we measure the degree of association or relationship between two variables only. For example, when we study the correlation between the price and demand of a product, it is a problem of simple correlation. That means in simple correlation, we study about only two variables. Now come to partial correlation. Partial correlation involves the study of three or more variables, but we consider only two variables to be influencing each other, the effect of other influencing variables being kept constant. Thus, in partial correlation, we measure the degree of relationship between the variable y and one of the variables x1, x2, xn with the effect of all the other variables removed. We can understand it by taking an example. If we consider three variables, namely yield of wheat, amount of rainfall, and amount of fertilizers, and we limit our correlation analysis to yield and rainfall with the effect of fertilizers used removed, it becomes a problem relating to partial correlation. That means in partial correlation, we study about only two variables and we remove the effect of any other variables. Now come to multiple correlation. Multiple correlation involves the study of three or more variables simultaneously. Thus, in multiple correlation, we measure the degree of relationship between variables y and all the variables x1, x2 and xn taken together. Again, we can understand it by taking an example. If we study the relationship between the yield of wheat per acre and both amount of rainfall and the amount of fertilizers used, it becomes a problem relating to multiple correlation. In partial correlation, we did not consider the effect of fertilizers used. Now come to linear and non-linear correlation. Linear correlation is the correlation between two variables is said to be linear if the amount of change in one variable tends to bear a constant ratio to the amount of change in the other variables. For example, consider the following data. Now, if we have the value of variable x is 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50. Now the variable y has the values 40, 80, 120, 160 and 200. So we observe that the ratio of changes between the two variables is same and hence the correlation between x and y is linear. It may be remarked that if the value of two variables which are linearly correlated are plotted on a graph paper, all the plotted points would be on a straight line. Now come to non-linear or curvilinear. So what is curvilinear? The correlation between two variables is said to be non-linear or curvilinear if the amount of change in one variable does not bear a constant ratio to the amount of change in the other variable. For example, if the amount of fertilizer used is doubled, the production of wheat may not necessarily be doubled. Thus, we can say that the correlation between the amount of fertilizer and the production of wheat is non-linear. So, these are the types of correlation. So, this is all about the today's lecture. Thank you, students.